The girl heaven did in favor. The storm came the night Eden Grace Harden was born, and folks in Pine Hollow swore it never truly left. Lightning split the sky like God's own axe that September evening in 1873, and thunder shook the wooden walls of Doc Morrison's cabin where Martha Harden labored. The midwife, old Constance Miller, crossed herself when the first cry mixed with the crash of thunder. "Born with the storm," she muttered, wrapping the squalling infant in rough muslin. "Mark my words. Martha, this one's different." Martha, weak from the birthing, could only hold her daughter close and whisper prayers into the howling wind. Her husband, Samuel, stood at the window watching the rain lash against the glass, his weathered hands gripping his hat. He'd seen many storms in his 30-odd years, but this one felt personal somehow, like the sky itself had opinions about his firstborn. Eden grew like prairie grass, wild and stubborn. By the time she could walk, the townsfolk had already started their whispers. The Henderson boys' milk cow went dry the week after Eden toddled past their fence. The church bell cracked during a clear day when she was playing nearby. Coincidences, any sensible person would say. But Pine Hollow wasn't known for its abundance of sensible folk. The real trouble started when Eden turned 3. It was another September day, hot and still as held breath. Samuel Harden was mending fence posts in the north pasture when the storm rolled in without warning. Eden remembered it in fragments, her father's hat sailing past the kitchen window, her mother's scream cutting through the air sharper than the lightning that followed. They found Samuel beneath the old cottonwood, its trunk split clean through. The tree that had shaded 3 generations of Hardens was now a monument to loss. At the funeral, people kept their distance from the little girl in the too big black dress, her dark eyes reflecting something that made them uncomfortable. Storm-cursed. They called her when they thought she couldn't hear. "That child brings the thunder." Martha tried to shield her daughter from the worst of it, but grief has a way of making people weak where they need to be strong. The whispers wore her down like water on stone. She took to staying inside, curtains drawn, jumping at every distant rumble of thunder. Eden would find her mother staring at nothing, lips moving in silent conversation with the absent. The winter Eden turned 6. Martha Harden packed a single carpet bag and left before dawn. No note, no goodbye, just empty drawers and a wedding ring on the kitchen table. Some said she'd gone back east to family. Others claimed they'd seen her boarding the stage to California. Eden never knew which stories to believe, if any. That's when Grandmother Harden took over. Agnes Harden was carved from tougher wood than her daughter-in-law. 70 years of frontier living had made her immune to superstition and gossip. She moved into the cabin, bringing her beehives and her stubborn practicality. "You listen here, Eden Grace," she said that first night, settling the girl on her knee. "People are going to talk. That's what people do when they're scared of what they don't understand. But you're a Harden, and Hardens don't bow to fear or foolishness." Under Agnes's care, Eden learned useful things: how to tend bees without getting stung, how to harvest honey and render wax, how to make candles that burned clean and long. The work gave her purpose, and purpose was a kind of armor against the town's cold shoulders. But armor couldn't stop everything. Eden was 10 when she truly understood what it meant to be storm-cursed in Pine Hollow. She'd gone to town with Agnes to trade candles for flour and salt. At Morrison's general store, she'd reached for a jar of penny candy when Mrs. Morrison yanked it away. "Not for you," the woman said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "I won't have you touching things meant for decent folks' children." Agnes's hand on Eden's shoulder was the only thing that kept the girl from running. "We'll take our business elsewhere, Harriet," Agnes said calmly, "though I doubt you'll find many customers willing to pay what our candles are worth." They left with their heads high, but Eden felt the stares burning into her back like brands. The seasons turned, and Eden grew from a wild child into a young woman who'd learned to wear stillness like a shield. At 17, she could read the weather and the behavior of her grandmother's bees, could pour perfect candles without measuring, could ignore a slight so smoothly the person delivering it wondered if she'd even heard. She went to town once a week, always on Tuesday mornings when the streets were quietest. Her routine never varied, first to the post office, though letters never came, then to whatever merchant would trade with her, and straight back home. She spoke only when spoken to, which wasn't often. The children of Pine Hollow grew up on stories about Eden Harden. Parents used her name to frighten them into obedience. Behave, or the witch girl will call down lightning on you. Don't go near the Harden place, that's where the storms are born. Eden heard it all and said nothing. What was there to say that she was just a girl who'd lost her father to lightning and her mother to grief? That she spent her evenings reading by candlelight and her mornings tending bees, that the only magic she knew was the ordinary kind, making light from wax, sweetness from honey, and peace from solitude. By the time Eden reached 20, she'd perfected the art of being alone without being lonely. The cabin in the pines was her world, and she'd made it a good one. The main room smelled of beeswax and honey. Books lined the walls. Agnes had insisted on education. Storm curse or no storm curse, the garden produced enough to keep them fed, and the forest provided the rest. Agnes was slowing down. Her hands not as steady with the candle making, her steps not as sure among the hives. Eden took on more of the work without complaint. This was her life, and she'd made her peace with it, or so she told herself on the quiet days. But on storm days, when thunder rolled across the mountains and lightning painted the sky, Eden stood at the window and felt the old restlessness stirring. The townspeople were wrong about her bringing the storms. She no more controlled the weather than she controlled the whispers. But they were right about one thing: she'd been born with thunder in her blood, and no amount of careful living could wash it clean. Sometimes, watching the rain lash against the windows, she wondered what would happen if she stopped being careful, if she went to town on a day other than Tuesday, if she spoke first instead of waiting to be spoken to, if she let the wildness that had marked her childhood creep back in. But then the storm would pass, and routine would settle over her shoulders like a familiar shawl. There was work to do, candles to make, bees to tend, an aging grandmother to care for. The people of Pine Hollow had decided who she was the night she was born. After 20 years, Eden had almost started to believe them. Almost. In the distance, thunder rumbled a promise or a threat, depending on who was listening. Eden touched the window glass, feeling the vibration in her fingertips. Storm-cursed, they called her. Maybe they were right, but as Agnes liked to say, a curse was only what you let it be. The rain began to fall, and Eden turned from the window. There were candles to make before nightfall, and darkness waited for no one, cursed or otherwise. Whispers and solitude. Tuesday morning came with frost on the pines and a sky threatening snow. Eden wrapped her wool shawl tighter as she loaded the wagon with candles, 3 dozen this week, each one perfect as the last. Agnes sat by the stove, her breathing labored but her eyes still sharp. "Mind the Fletcher woman," Agnes warned. "She's been spreading talk again." Eden merely nodded. Sarah Fletcher had been spreading talk since Eden was old enough to understand what gossip meant. The woman had turned spreading rumors into an art form, each story more elaborate than the last. The ride to town took an hour when the roads were good. Today, with mud from last week's rain frozen into ruts, it took longer. Eden didn't mind. The forest was honest company. The trees didn't whisper behind their branches or crossed to the other side of the path when she passed. Pine Hollow sat in a valley between 2 ridges, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to huddle together for warmth or gossip. Depending on the season, the main street was already busy despite the early hour. Eden kept her eyes on her mule's ears and pretended not to notice how conversation stopped as her wagon rolled past. Her first stop was always the post office. Old Mr. Garrett ran it with the same efficiency he'd brought to the job for 30 years. He was one of the few who'd treat her with something approaching normalcy, though even he kept their interactions brief. "Morning, Miss Harden," he said without looking up from sorting mail. "Nothing for you today." There never was, but Eden thanked him anyway and left. Hope was a habit hard to break, even when you knew better. The general store was her next stop. Morrison's had the best prices, but Eden hadn't darkened their doorstep in 10 years. Instead, she went to Holbrook's Dry Goods, where Jacob Holbrook would at least take her money without making her feel like it was contaminated. The bell above the door announced her arrival with a cheerful chime that seemed to mock the sudden hush that fell over the store. Mrs. Fletcher was there, naturally, holding court near the fabric display with 2 other women Mrs. Bennett and young Mrs. Crawford, whose husband owned the sawmill. Eden moved to the counter, setting down her basket of candles with careful precision. Jacob emerged from the back room, his face settling into the carefully neutral expression he reserved for her visits. "Miss Hardin, the usual trade?" "Yes, Mr. Holbrook. 3 dozen candles for flour, salt, and coffee, if you please." Behind her, the whispers started. Eden had learned to pick out her name even when it was barely breathed. 20 years of practice had made her ears sharp as any hunter's. "Saw her near the creek last full moon. My chickens haven't laid right since. Mark my words, that girl brings nothing but ladies." Jacob's voice cut through the gossip like a dull knife through gristle. "Was there something you needed?" Sarah Fletcher drew herself up, her narrow face pinching with indignation. "We're paying customers. Mr. Holbrook, we have a right to express our concerns about unwholesome influences in our community." Eden kept her back straight, her hands steady as she counted out the candles. 12, 24, 36, each one perfect, each one representing hours of careful work that would light homes throughout Pine Hollow, even the homes of those who whispered. "Your concerns are noted, Mrs. Fletcher," Jacob said dryly. "Now, about that calico you were interested in, the exchange complete." Eden gathered her purchases and turned to leave. Young Mrs. Crawford's daughter, a girl of perhaps 6, stood near the door. The child stared at Eden with the frank curiosity of the innocent. Before her mother yanked her back so hard the girl cried out, "Don't you look at her! Mary Elizabeth!" "Mrs. Crawford hissed, "Don't you ever look at her." Eden left without a word, but the child's confused tears followed her onto the street. The bakery was next. Thomas Bader, the German baker, would trade bread for candles without sermons or suspicious looks. His wife had died in childbirth 3 years back, leaving him with a business to run and 4 children to raise. Perhaps that shared weight of loss made him kinder, or perhaps he simply needed good candles. Eden didn't question Mercy's. "Guten Morgen, Miss Hardin," he greeted her, his English still carrying the music of his homeland. "The candles, they burn well. My Anna, she reads late into the night by their light." It was more conversation than she usually got in town. Eden found herself almost smiling. "I'm glad they serve you well, Mr. Bader." "Yeah, very well. And here," he wrapped an extra small loaf in brown paper, "for your grandmother, with my compliments." Kindness was so rare it made her throat tight. Eden managed to thank him and escape before the emotion showed on her face. Weakness of any sort was blood in the water here. The final stop was the hardest. The feed store sat at the end of Main Street, run by the Calhoun brothers, Frank and Daniel. They were fair traders but made no secret of their feelings about her. Eden needed chicken feed and couldn't get it anywhere else. The store was crowded with ranch hands and farmers. The smell of grain and tobacco smoke made the air thick. Conversations didn't stop when she entered, but they shifted, becoming performances meant for her ears. "Storm coming," one cowhand said loudly. "Always is when certain folks come to town. Heard tell lightning struck the Hendricks barn last month." Another added, "Strange how it's always the places she's been." Eden found Frank Calhoun and stated her business quickly. He filled her order in silence, but when she reached for the sack of feed, he held it back. "You know," he said, his voice pitched to Carrie, Might be better for everyone if you found somewhere else to do your trading. Maybe a bigger town, somewhere that don't mind peculiar folk. The store had gone quiet, everyone waiting to see what the storm-cursed girl would do. Eden met Frank's gaze steadily. I pay fair price for fair goods. Mr. Calhoun, same as anyone. It ain't about the money. Daniel Calhoun moved to stand beside his brother. It's about what's right for this town, what's safe. Then you'd best stop selling liquor to Sam McKenna, Eden said calmly. His drunk rages do more harm to this town than I ever have. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. Sam McKenna had blackened his wife's eye more than once, and everyone knew it. But Sam was one of them, and Eden was not. Frank shoved the feed sack at her. Take your goods and go. Eden left with what dignity she could salvage, loading her wagon under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. But as she climbed onto the seat, she heard something that stopped her cold. Which? A young voice said clearly. A boy, maybe 12, standing with a group of his friends. My PA says you're a witch who brings storms. Eden looked at the boy, the Reverend Norton's son. She thought and saw her own childhood reflected in the cruel certainty of his expression. The other children took up the word, chanting it like a game. Witch! 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 Their parents did nothing to stop them. Some even smiled. Eden snapped the reins and guided her mule out of town, the chant following her like crows after carrion. The road home stretched before her, winding through forests that grew thicker and more welcoming with each mile from town. By the time she reached the cabin, her hands were shaking not from cold but from the effort of holding herself together. Agnes took one look at her face and opened her arms. Eden, 20 years old and too grown for such things, fell into her grandmother's embrace like a child. They're getting worse, Eden whispered into Agnes's shoulder. Fear makes fools of people, Agnes said, stroking her granddaughter's dark hair. And fools make cruelty into righteousness. That night, Eden stood at her bedroom window watching clouds build over the mountains. The townspeople were right about one thing: storms did seem to follow her. But whether she brought them or they simply recognized a kindred spirit, she couldn't say. Lightning flickered in the distance, and Eden pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere in Pine Hollow, mothers were pulling their children inside, shuttering windows, speaking her name in hushed tones as if it could summon disaster. Let them, she thought with a fierceness that surprised her. Let them huddle in their homes lit by her candles, telling stories about the witch in the woods. She'd given them what they seemed to want a monster to fear, a cautionary tale to frighten their children. But alone in her room, with only the approaching storm for company, Eden allowed herself to wonder what it would be like to walk down Main Street without silence following in her wake. To have someone look at her and see just a woman, not a curse wrapped in flesh. The thunder rolled closer, and Eden turned from the window. Tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same whispers, the same careful dance of survival in a place that didn't want her. But tonight, she had a warm home, a grandmother who loved her, and the honest companionship of the storm. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And unlike the townspeople's approval, it was real. The stranger returns to still waters. The morning Callum Reed rode back into Pine Hollow. The sky was the color of old pewter and the air tasted of coming snow. 3 years had carved new lines into his face, and dust from 100 different trails had settled into the creases of his coat. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, picked its way through the muddy Main Street with the careful steps of an animal that had learned to trust its rider through harder paths than this. Callum had left Pine Hollow as a boy of 22, with nothing but ambition and a strong back. He returned at 25 with calloused hands, a army discharge paper, and news that his parents' ranch now belonged to him alone. The fever had taken them both last winter while he was stationed at Fort Grant, fighting Apaches and trying to forget the sound of his mother's laughter. The town looked smaller than memory had painted it. The buildings seemed to lean together like old men sharing secrets, and the faces that peered from windows were variations on the same themes he'd left behind. Some things, it seemed, were constants in the world. His first stop was the land office to file the papers making him the legal owner of the Reed place. Judge Hartwell, ancient when Callum was a boy and apparently immortal, barely looked up from his ledger. "Reed's boy," the judge said, his voice dry as August Creek beds. "Heard you went soldier." "I did." "Heard you're back." "I am." "Ranch has been sitting empty. You'll have work ahead of you." Callum had ridden past the ranch on his way to town. The judge's assessment was generous. The house needed new shingles. The barn door hung crooked, and the fences had given up any pretense of keeping anything in or out. But the land was good, the well was deep, and he'd slept in worse places than a drafty ranch house. "Work never troubled me," Callum said. The judge finally looked up, his faded blue eyes taking in Callum's travel-worn appearance. "Town's the same as you left it. Mostly, we keep to ourselves, mind our business, help our neighbors when Christian duty calls. You understanding me, boy?" There was weight in those words, a reminder that fitting in required more than just owning land. Callum had spent 3 years taking orders. He recognized one when he heard it. "I understand." "Good." The judge stamped the papers with more force than necessary. "Welcome home." The word home sat strangely in Callum's chest as he left the land office. Home had been a dozen different army camps, a bedroll under foreign stars, the back of whatever horse he was riding. The Reed Ranch was just another place to rest until it was time to move on. Except he couldn't move on anymore. There was nowhere else to go. The saloon hadn't changed, same warped floorboards, same mirror behind the bar with a crack running through it like a lightning bolt. Same smell of whiskey and old smoke. Tom Brennan still tended bar, though his red hair had gone mostly gray. "Callum Reed," Tom said, already reaching for a glass. "Heard you were back." News traveled fast in Pine Hollow. Callum accepted the whiskey better than he remembered and settled against the bar. A few old-timers occupied the corner table, their card game temporarily forgotten as they sized him up. "Sorry about your folks," Tom continued. "They were good people." "They were—" Callum took a sip. Let the burn remind him he was alive. "Place looks the same." "Not much changes here." Tom refilled his glass without being asked. "Though we've had some excitement, lightning strikes, failed crops, the usual blamed on the usual suspects. One of the card players, Will Morrison from the general store, snorted. That hardened girl brings nothing but trouble. Mark my words, things got worse after you left. Storm-cursed, that one." Callum remembered Eden Harden vaguely, a quiet girl with dark hair who'd kept to herself even as a child. Her father had been killed by lightning when Callum was still in school, and her mother had run off, or died. The stories varied. "Still blaming a girl for the weather?" Callum asked mildly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Will's face reddened. "You've been gone, Reed. You don't know how it's been. Livestock dying, wells going dry, storms coming out of nowhere, and always after she's been around." "Sounds like Wyoming," Callum said. "Weather does what it wants." "You taking her side?" This from another player, Ben Calhoun, one of the feed store brothers. "Didn't know there were sides to take." Callum finished his whiskey and set coins on the bar. "Just saying I've seen plenty of storms that didn't need a woman to blame them on." He left before the conversation could escalate. 3 years of army life had taught him when to advance and when to retreat. But as he collected his horse and headed for the ranch, he found himself thinking about Eden Harden, the girl the whole town seemed determined to fear. The Reed Ranch sat 5 miles outside town, up a winding road that had once been well-traveled when his parents were alive. Now grass grew in the wagon ruts, and the gate hung open like a broken jaw. The house squatted against the hillside, built from logs his grandfather had cut and chinked with hope and stubbornness. Callum spent the rest of the day assessing the damage. The roof leaked in 3 places. Mice had claimed the pantry, and the pump handle broke off in his hand when he tried to draw water. But the foundation was solid. The walls were true, and the view from the porch stretched all the way to the mountains. He made a list of supplies needed, prioritizing what his savings could cover. New shingles could wait for spring. The pump handle couldn't. He'd need to go back to town, face the questions and judgment he'd walked away from earlier. That night, he slept on the floor near the fireplace, wrapped in his army blanket. The house creaked and settled around him, speaking a language he'd almost forgotten. Somewhere in the walls, mice scurried about their business. Outside, an owl called, the sound lonely as a bugle at sunset. The next morning brought purpose with the sun. Callum spent the day clearing debris, patching the worst of the holes, and making the kitchen habitable. Physical work was a relief after months of traveling. His hands remembered the rhythm of hammer and saw, skills learned at his father's side. By the third day, he'd established a routine: work until the light faded, eat a simple meal, fall into exhausted sleep. It was almost peaceful, if you didn't count the memories that crept in when his guard was down. His mother singing while she cooked, his father's slow smile over a joke, the letter that had arrived at Fort Grant, 2 months too late for goodbyes. A week into his homecoming, Callum realized he needed more than determination to make the ranch viable. He needed supplies, tools, and probably help with the larger repairs, which meant returning to town and playing the social games he'd never been good at. He chose a Saturday, when the town would be busy and he might blend into the crowd. The strategy might have worked if Pine Hollow had crowds to blend into. Instead, he found himself the center of attention he didn't want, fielding questions about his service, his plans, his intentions. "You planning to run cattle?" Frank Calhoun asked, his tone suggesting there was a right and wrong answer. "Eventually, need to fix the fences first. Could use good beef around here," Judge Hartwell said from his customary spot outside the land office. "Long as it's raised proper, by proper folk." There it was again, that undercurrent of us and them. Callum nodded non-committally and escaped to the hardware store. He was examining harness leather when he heard the whispers start. A quick glance toward the door showed why. Eden Harden had entered, a basket of candles on her arm, her dark head high despite the way conversation died around her. She'd grown up while he was gone. The quiet girl he remembered had become a woman who wore isolation like armor. She moved through the store as if she didn't notice the way people stepped back. But Callum saw the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she kept her eyes forward. Their paths crossed at the counter, up close. He could see what the gossips missed: the steady intelligence in her dark eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the careful grace of someone who'd learned to navigate a hostile world. "Miss Harden," he said, touching the brim of his hat. She started, clearly not expecting acknowledgement. For a moment, something flickered across her face: surprise, maybe, or hope quickly suppressed. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was low, cultured. "I heard you'd returned. News travels." "It does." She completed her transaction in silence. But as she turned to leave, she paused. "Your mother was kind to me once. I was sorry to hear of your loss." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of beeswax and something floral. The store erupted in whispers the moment the door closed behind her. "See how she knew about his mother, Mrs." Fletcher hissed. "Unnatural, the way she knows things." "Or she can read," Callum said dryly. "Death notices were in the paper, I assume." The silence that followed was deafening. Callum paid for his supplies and left, but not before catching a few muttered comments about newcomers not understanding how things were. Riding back to the ranch, supplies tied behind his saddle, Callum found himself thinking about Eden Harden again, about the way she'd held herself like a queen in a room full of people determined to see a witch, about the flash of humanity he'd seen when she mentioned his mother. He'd known what it was like to be an outsider. The army was full of men running from or towards something, men who didn't fit the molds their towns had tried to press them into, But at least he'd had the option to leave. Eden Harden had stayed, had endured, had built something like a life in a place that feared her. That took a kind of courage he recognized, even if he didn't fully understand it. The ranch house appeared around the bend, still shabby but starting to look less abandoned. Callum unsaddled his horse and set about unloading his supplies. There was work to do, fences to mend, a life to build from the remnants his parents had left behind. But as he worked, he found his thoughts returning to dark eyes and careful grace, to a woman who lived like a ghost in her own town. He'd told the men in the saloon he didn't believe in taking sides. That might have been the first lie he'd told since coming home. Meeting among the pines. The fog came early that October morning, rolling down from the mountains like a living thing, turning the familiar forest into something from a dream. Eden moved through it carefully, her breath visible in the chill air, the wheels of her small cart creaking over pine needles and stones. She'd been gathering kindling since before dawn, and the old stove consumed wood like a hungry animal. And winter was showing its teeth early this year. Her mule, Bessie, knew these paths as well as Eden did. The animal picked her way around roots and rocks without guidance, leaving Eden free to scan the ground for good burning wood. The fog muffled everything, creating a world that existed only in the circle of visible ground around them. That's why she didn't hear the other traveler until it was too late to change direction. The man emerged from the fog like something conjured, leading a horse that favored its left front leg. For a moment, Eden's heart seized her first instinct, always flight, when encountering anyone beyond the safety of routine. Then she recognized him. Callum Reed, mud-splattered and looking thoroughly frustrated. They stood frozen for a moment, two people caught outside the normal patterns of their lives. The fog swirled between them, making the encounter feel unreal, dreamlike. Miss Harden. He touched his hat brim, the gesture automatic even in the middle of nowhere. Mr. Reed. Eden's hands tightened on Bessie's lead rope. Your horse is lame. Stepped in a rabbit hole about a mile back. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that made him look younger than his travel-worn face suggested. I was trying to find the main road. Eden glanced at the fog-shrouded forest. He was heading the wrong direction entirely, deeper into the woods instead of out. City-bred folks, even those who'd been away only a few years, forgot how the forest could turn you around. You're going the wrong way, she said carefully. The road is back that direction, then east at the fallen oak. I remember a fallen oak, he said with a rueful smile. Problem is, I've passed 3 of them this morning. Despite herself, Eden felt her lips twitch. The forest was full of fallen oaks, the one split by lightning, with moss only on the north side. Ah, he looked at his horse, then back at her. I don't suppose that is... Would you mind if I followed you out once you're finished with your gathering? The request hung in the foggy air between them. Eden knew what Agnes would say: help those who need it, regardless of what the town thinks. But Eden had learned to be cautious. Kindness could be misinterpreted, twisted into something sinister by those eager to think the worst. Still, leaving a man lost in the fog with a lame horse seemed unnecessarily cruel, even by Pine Hollow's standards. I'm nearly done, she heard herself say. Your horse needs that leg looked at. She moved to the animal, keeping her movement slow and calm. The horse, a good-looking chestnut, stood quietly as she ran her hands down its leg. Heat in the tendon, some swelling, but nothing that wouldn't mend with rest. Just strained, she said, stepping back. Keep him off it for a few days. You know horses. I know animals. It came out more defensive than she'd intended. They're simpler than people. Can't argue with that. He studied her with eyes the color of winter sage. Direct, but not unkind. I interrupted your work. Eden turned back to her gathering, uncomfortably aware of him watching as she selected deadwood and loaded it into the cart. The fog made everything intimate, as if they existed in a small room together instead of the vast forest. I remember you, he said suddenly. From school. You sat in the back corner, near the window. Eden's hands stilled on a piece of birch bark. That was a long time ago. You were the only one who got perfect marks in arithmetic. Used to drive the teacher mad because you'd solve problems in your head instead of showing the work. The memory surfaced unbidden, Miss Pruitt, insisting Eden must be cheating, making her solve problems at the board to prove she wasn't, the way the other children had whispered when she got everyone right. I didn't know anyone noticed, Eden said quietly. I was terrible at arithmetic. Spent most of lessons watching you figure things out without even picking up your slate. He shifted his weight, his horse moving restlessly beside him. Made me wonder what else you saw that the rest of us missed. It was the longest conversation Eden had had with anyone besides Agnes in months. She didn't know what to do with it, how to navigate this unexpected moment of what connection understanding. We should go, she said, securing the last of the wood. The fog will lift soon, and you'll want to be home before it does. She didn't explain why that once the fog lifted, someone might see them together, might add this innocent encounter to their arsenal of gossip. He seemed to understand anyway, falling into step beside her without argument. They walked in surprisingly comfortable silence, the fog creating a barrier between them and the real world. Bessie plodded along. Unconcerned with the addition to their party, the lame horse limped gamely behind its master. Why did you come back? The question escaped before Eden could stop it. You got out. You could have gone anywhere. Callum was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won understanding. Running doesn't change who you are, just changes where you're standing when you figure it out. He paused. Besides, the ranch is all I have left of them. Seemed wrong to let it die too. Eden understood that the weight of inheritance, of carrying on when those you loved couldn't. I'm sorry. About your parents. Heard you lost your father young, and your mother. Left. Eden kept her voice steady. She left. They'd reached the lightning-struck oak, its dead trunk pale as bone in the fog. Eden pointed east. Follow this track about half a mile. You'll hit the main road just above the Turner farm. He didn't move immediately. Thank you for the help. It was nothing. It wasn't. He touched his hat again, a gesture that seemed less formal this time. Most people wouldn't have bothered, especially not for someone they barely know. Eden thought of all the times she'd needed help in town, all the turned backs and deaf ears. Most people aren't judged for their kindness the way they judge others for existing. The bitter truth of it hung between them. Callum studied her face, seeming to really see her for the first time. No, he said quietly. I suppose they're not. He started to turn away, then stopped. From his pocket, he pulled something white, a handkerchief, clean but worn at the edges. You dropped this in town last week. Eden looked at the square of fabric. It wasn't hers, she'd never owned anything so fine. But the way he held it out, careful and deliberate, made the truth irrelevant. Keep it, she said, for your kindness today. Something shifted in his expression. He tucked the handkerchief back in his pocket with care. Until next time, then, Miss Harden. There wouldn't be a next time. Couldn't be. But Eden found herself nodding anyway. Until next time, Mr. Reed. She watched him disappear into the fog, his lame horse following faithfully. Only when the sound of their passage faded did she turn Bessie toward home. Agnes was waiting on the porch, her sharp eyes taking in Eden's expression. You're late. I helped someone who was lost. Eden began unloading the wood, avoiding her grandmother's gaze. Callum Reed. His horse went lame. The Reed boy's back, then. Agnes considered this. His mother was a good woman. Brought me soup when you had the fever that winter. Eden remembered the fever, but not the soup. She'd been 7, burning up and delirious, convinced the thunder was calling her name. I didn't know that. Plenty you don't know about the kindnesses done in quiet. Not everyone in this town fears you, child. Some just fear being seen, not fearing you. It was a distinction Eden had never considered. She thought of Callum Reed in the fog, talking to her like she was just a woman, not a curse or a cautionary tale. "He remembered me from school," she said softly. "Remembered I was good at arithmetic." Agnes smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "Did he now?" "It doesn't mean anything." "Didn't say it did." Agnes turned toward the door. "But it's interesting how some folks see what matters while others only see what they're told to see." That night, Eden stood at her window as the fog finally lifted, revealing a world washed clean and silver with moonlight. Somewhere out there, Callum Reed was tending his lame horse, perhaps thinking of their strange encounter in the mist. Or perhaps not. Perhaps kindness was just kindness, with no deeper meaning to parse. But when Eden finally slept, she dreamed of sage green eyes and arithmetic, of conversations that didn't end in whispers, of a world where dropping a handkerchief you never owned could be the beginning of something instead of the end. The morning would bring reality back, the whispers, the careful dance of survival, the weight of being who the town had decided she was. But for tonight, in dreams, Eden allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to be seen as herself. Just Eden, just a woman who knew horses and gathered wood and had once been good at arithmetic. It was enough to carry her through till dawn, the rains and the questions. The rains came early that November, turning the roads to thick mud and keeping most folks indoors. For Eden, it meant fewer trips to town, which suited her fine. The root cellar was well stocked, the woodpile high, and Agnes had taught her to read weather in the movements of clouds and the behavior of birds. What Eden hadn't expected was how the memory of a fog-shrouded morning would linger like smoke in the rafters, returning at odd moments. She'd catch herself thinking about sage green eyes while pouring candles, or remembering the careful way Callum Reed had tucked that handkerchief away while she worked the garden. Foolishness, she told herself. One civil conversation didn't erase 20 years of being Pine Hollow's favorite cautionary tale. At the Reed Ranch, Callum had problems more pressing than memories. The barn roof had given up entirely during the first heavy rain, and he'd spent 3 days moving what livestock he'd managed to acquire to the tool shed. His savings were dwindling faster than anticipated, and the list of necessary repairs grew longer each day. He'd taken to frequenting Murphy's saloon in the evenings, not for the whiskey, but for the information. Ranch work was isolating, and he needed to know which merchants were fair, which neighbors might help with barn raising come spring, and where to find good breeding stock. "You're wasting your time with that land," Ben Calhoun told him one evening, deep in his cups. "Too much work for one man, and you won't find help easy." "Why's that?" Callum nursed his single whiskey, making it last. "Same reason your daddy had trouble keeping hands the last few years. Too close to the hardened place. That curse spreads. You know, bad luck follows that girl like a shadow." Callum kept his expression neutral. "My father never mentioned any trouble with the Hardens." "Course not. Your folks were too Christian to speak ill." Will Morrison joined the conversation, his face flushed from drink. "But facts are facts. Ever since that girl was born, things go wrong around here. Livestock dies, crops fail, storms come out of nowhere." "Sounds like ranching to me," Callum said dryly. The men exchanged glances. "You haven't been back long enough," Will said. "You'll see. That girl's got the devil's own luck, and it spreads to anyone fool enough to." He stopped, his eyes fixing on something over Callum's shoulder. The saloon had gone quiet, the way it did when trouble walked in. Callum turned to see Tom Brennan, the bartender, looking uncomfortable. "What is it, Tom?" "Nothing that concerns you. Read." But Tom's eyes kept flicking between Callum and the door. "Just, there's been talk about you being seen with the Harden girl." Callum felt his jaw tighten. "I got turned around in the fog. She pointed me toward the road. That's all." "Nobody's accusing," Tom said quickly. "Just, folks notice things. Want to make sure you know how things are around here." I spent 3 years getting shot at by Apaches, Callum said, standing. I reckon I can handle small-town gossip. He left before anyone could respond, but he felt their eyes following him to the door. Outside, rain pelted the muddy street, and Callum pulled his coat tighter. The town seemed smaller each time he came to it, meaner and more petty than the place memory had preserved. 2 days later, the rain finally stopped, leaving the world washed and gleaming. Callum needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to prove a point to himself if no one else. He hitched up his wagon and headed to town, taking the long way that passed the Hardin place. The cabin sat back from the road, smoke rising from the chimney, beehives arranged in neat rows despite the season. He might have driven past without stopping, but movement caught his eye. Eden was struggling with a broken fence post, the ground too soft from rain to hold it properly. Before he could think better of it, Callum turned his wagon up the narrow drive. Eden straightened at the sound of wheels, her face cycling through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been resignation. She wore a faded blue dress and an apron covered in mud, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. Mr. Reed. Her voice carried careful neutrality. Are you lost again? Despite everything, he found himself almost smiling. No, ma'am, but that post is about to be... She looked at the leaning fence post, then back at him. I can manage. I'm sure you can. He climbed down from the wagon anyway. But my mother would rise from her grave to box my ears if I drove past a lady in need of help. Eden opened her mouth to protest. He thought, then closed it. Your horse, is he better? Good as new. Turns out you know what you're talking about when it comes to animals. He moved to examine the post, aware of her watching him with eyes that missed nothing. The ground was indeed too soft. The post needed bracing until it dried out. Simple enough work, but it required 2 people. Hold it steady, he said, producing rope from his wagon. They worked in silence, Eden keeping the post upright while he secured it to temporary stakes. Their hands brushed once as they adjusted the rope, and Eden jerked back as if burned. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean... You didn't do anything wrong. The words came out sharper than intended, fueled by sudden anger, not at her, but at a town that had made this woman afraid of even accidental contact. She studied his face. You've heard the talk. Not a question. Callum tied off the rope with unnecessary force. I've heard foolishness from bored people with nothing better to do than blame their troubles on a woman who minds her own business. Is that what you think I am? A woman who minds her own business? He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. I think you're someone who survived 20 years of ignorance with more grace than this town deserves. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor she wore. You don't know me, Mr. Reed. No, he agreed. But I'd like to. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Eden wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young. You should go, she said quietly, before someone sees. Let them see. You don't understand. You've been gone. You don't know how bad it's gotten. Last month, the Fletcher boy fell from his horse, and they blamed me because I'd walked past their farm that morning. The Hendricks lost 3 chickens to a fox, and somehow that was my fault too. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her arms. Now you've helped me twice. If anything goes wrong at your ranch, then I'll know who to blame. Callum interrupted. The same thing that's been causing problems for ranchers since the beginning weather. Bad luck and the nature of the business. A sound from the cabin made them both turn. Agnes Hardin stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a walking stick Callum didn't remember from his youth. You'll catch your death standing in the wind, she called. Both of you, come in for coffee. Eden shook her head quickly. Grandmother. I'm old. Girl, not dead. And I'll not have it said that the Hardins forgot their manners. Agnes fixed Callum with eyes still sharp despite her years. "You helped my granddaughter. Least we can do is offer warm coffee on a cold day." Callum glanced at Eden, reading panic in every line of her body. The smart thing would be to make excuses, leave before this became more complicated. But he'd never been accused of being smart. "I'd be grateful, Mrs. Harden." The cabin was smaller than it looked from outside, but scrupulously clean. The smell of beeswax and herbs filled the space, along with something baking that made his stomach remind him he'd skipped breakfast. Books lined one wall, more than he'd expected. A spinning wheel sat in the corner, and bundles of herbs hung from the rafters. Agnes poured coffee with hands that shook slightly, then settled into a rocking chair. Eden remained standing, positioned where she could watch both her grandmother and Callum, as if expecting one or both to explode. "Your mother brought me soup once," Agnes said without preamble. "When Eden had fever, dead of winter, roads near impassable, but she came anyway." "That sounds like her," Callum said quietly. "Good woman. Shame what happened." Agnes sipped her coffee. "Shame what happens to a lot of good people in this town." The conversation that followed was careful, full of pauses and unspoken words. Agnes asked about the ranch, offered advice about which merchants were honest, shared memories of his parents that Callum tucked away like treasures. Eden said little, but gradually her death grip on her coffee cup eased. When Callum finally rose to leave, Agnes struggled to her feet. "You come back," she said firmly. "Any man who'll help without being asked is welcome here." Outside, Eden walked him to his wagon. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said. "They'll talk." "They're already talking." He climbed up to the seat, then looked down at her. "That handkerchief, you knew it wasn't yours." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You knew I knew." "Seemed like we were both pretending something that day. Figured it was only fair." This time her smile was real, transforming her face for just a moment before wariness returned. "Fair isn't something I'm used to. Maybe it's time to get used to it." He drove away before she could argue, but he felt her watching until the road curved and trees hid the cabin from view. Back in town, he stopped at the general store for supplies. The moment he walked in, conversations paused. "Heard you were out at the Harden place," Will Morrison said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Helped with a fence post." Callum selected items with deliberate calm. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's what my father taught me." "Your father was a good man," Will said. "But he's gone. You might want to think about what kind of reputation you want to build here." Callum set his purchases on the counter with more force than necessary. "I am thinking about it, and I'd rather be known as a man who helps those who need it than one who spreads gossip like an old woman." The store went silent. Will's face flushed dark red. "You calling me a gossip?" "If the shoe fits." Callum paid for his goods, aware of every eye in the place. "Good day, gentlemen." He left with his head high, but he could feel the mood shifting behind him. He'd chosen a side without meaning to. Or maybe he'd chosen it that morning in the fog when Eden Harden had helped him despite having every reason not to. Either way, there was no going back now. The question was whether moving forward would cost more than he was willing to pay. A simple invitation in the storm. The storm built all day, pressing down on Pine Hollow like a giant's hand. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old pewter, and the air tasted metallic with coming rain. Eden had gone to town despite Agnes's warnings about the weather. They needed flour and medicine for Agnes's worsening cough. Needs that wouldn't wait for clear skies. She'd made her purchases quickly, ignoring the usual whispers and cold shoulders. But the storm moved faster than anticipated. She was still 2 miles from home when the first fat drops began to fall, quickly becoming a torrent that turned the road to a river of mud. Bessie struggled against the wind, ears flat against her head. Eden squinted through the rain, looking for shelter, But there was nothing except trees that would attract lightning and open ground that offered no protection. The medicine in her basket needed to stay dry. Agnes's cough had worsened in the past week, and Dr. Patterson had stressed the importance of keeping the powder from moisture. Thunder crashed overhead. So loud Eden felt it in her chest. Bessie brayed in fear, stopping dead in the road. That's when Eden saw the light's warm yellow squares cutting through the gray veil of rain. The Reed Ranch, closer than home and built on higher ground. She hesitated. Seeking shelter there would only add fuel to the gossip fires. But another crack of thunder decided for her. Agnes needed that medicine dry and viable. Eden turned Bessie up the drive, fighting both the wind and her own instincts that screamed at her to find anywhere else to wait out the storm. But there was nowhere else. And pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when Agnes's health hung in the balance. Callum was on the porch before she reached the house, already moving to help with Bessie. He took in Eden's soaked state without comment, simply gesturing toward the door. "Inside," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "I'll see to the mule." Eden wanted to protest, to insist she could manage, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She stumbled up the porch steps and through the door he'd left open. The house wrapped around her like a blanket, warm, dry, smelling of coffee and wood smoke. Eden stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dress clung to her frame. Her hair had come completely undone, and she was creating a puddle on his clean floor. Callum came in moments later, water streaming from his hat. "Bessie's in the barn with hay and grain," he said, moving to the stove. "She'll be fine." "The medicine," Eden managed through chattering teeth. "Is it dry as dust? I put your basket on the table." He poured coffee into a cup, pressed it into her hands. "Drink. You're shaking." She was, Eden realized, not just from cold, but from the strangeness of it all being in a man's house, alone, while storm raged outside, if anyone found out. "I have a clean shirt and some old trousers of my mother's," Callum said, carefully not looking at her. "You'll catch your death in those wet things. Room at the top of the stairs, take whatever you need." Before she could protest, he'd grabbed his coat and headed back out. "Need to check the barn roof," he called over his shoulder. "Take your time." Eden stood alone in his kitchen, holding the warm cup between numb fingers. Everything about this was improper, dangerous to what remained of her reputation. But she was already soaked through, and Agnes needed her healthy more than Eden needed to preserve what little standing she had in town. She climbed the narrow stairs, finding a small bedroom that must have belonged to his mother. Everything was neat but dusty, as if frozen in time. Eden found the promised clothes, a man's work shirt, and a pair of worn trousers that would be scandalous in any other circumstance. She changed quickly, hanging her soaked dress near the window. The clothes smelled of cedar and lavender sachet, ghost scents from a woman Eden barely remembered. When she returned downstairs, Callum was back, stoking the fire higher. He glanced at her once, something unreadable crossing his face, then turned back to the flames. "Storm's getting worse. You might be here a while." Eden moved to the window, watching lightning illuminate the yard in sharp, white bursts. "They'll talk." "Let them." His voice was flat. "They talk anyway." Thunder crashed directly overhead, and Eden couldn't suppress her flinch. Callum noticed, of course he did. "You're afraid of storms," he said, not a question. "My father died in one." The words came without thought. "I was there, saw the lightning hit the tree, saw it fall." She stopped, surprised at herself. She never talked about that day. Callum moved to stand beside her at the window, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying for a child. The town said I brought the storm, that I was marked from birth." Eden laughed, the sound bitter. "Maybe they were right. Storms do seem to find me. Or maybe," Callum said quietly. Storms just happen, and people need someone to blame when they're scared. The wind howled around the house, rattling windows in their frames. But inside, it was warm and safe, and Eden felt something unknot in her chest. When was the last time she'd felt safe during a storm? "Tell me about the army," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than wind and memory. So he did, sharing stories of dust and heat, of men from a dozen different backgrounds learning to work together, of landscapes so different from Pine Hollow they might have been different worlds. Eden found herself relaxing, drawn into tales of places she'd only read about. "Why candles?" he asked eventually. "You could do anything with your mind for numbers, but you make candles." "They're honest work," Eden said. "Candles don't care who makes them. They burn the same for everyone." She paused. "And Agnes taught me. It's something of hers I can carry on. Like the ranch is for me." "Yes," Eden said softly. "Like that." They fell silent again, but it was comfortable now. The storm continued its fury outside, but the house stood firm. Callum made more coffee, found some bread and cheese for a simple meal. They ate quietly, the domesticity of it making Eden's chest tight with longing for things she'd never have. The thunder was rolling away when Callum spoke again. "That day in the fog, you could have left me lost. Most would have." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're not." He was looking at her with those sage green eyes, and Eden forgot how to breathe. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then lightning flashed again, breaking the spell, and Eden stepped back. "I should check the window, where I hung my dress." But when she turned to go, Callum caught her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused from work, gentle despite their strength. Eden, just her name, but the way he said it made her stop. She turned back, and somehow she was closer than she'd meant to be, close enough to see the gold flecks in his green eyes, to notice the scar on his jaw, to feel his breath on her face. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Probably not," he agreed, but he didn't let go of her hand. The lightning flashed again, and in that bright moment, Eden made a choice. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, quick and light as summer rain, for a heartbeat. The world stopped. No storm, no town, no whispers, just the two of them, suspended in a moment of perfect stillness. Then thunder crashed, and Eden jerked back, her face flaming. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" But Callum was smiling, the expression transforming his serious face. "Don't apologize. Not for that." He lifted her hand, still caught in his, and pressed a kiss to her palm. The gesture was somehow more intimate than the kiss itself, and Eden shivered. "The storm's passing," she said weakly. "Is it?" He was still looking at her like she was something wonderful, and Eden didn't know what to do with that. "I need to get home. Agnes will worry." "Of course." He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "I'll drive you. The roads will be rivers after this rain." She wanted to protest but knew he was right. Her dress was still damp but wearable. She changed quickly, trying not to think about how she'd kissed him, how he'd kissed her hand, how everything had shifted in the space of a heartbeat. The ride home was quiet, the storm reduced to distant grumbles and the occasional flash on the horizon. Callum handled the wagon expertly through the muddy roads, and Eden held the medicine basket carefully, trying to look anywhere but at him. When they reached her cabin, Agnes was on the porch despite the weather, wrapped in shawls. "About time," she called, but her sharp eyes were taking in everything Eden's still damp hair. Callum's protective positioning, the way they carefully weren't looking at each other. "Mr. Reed gave me shelter from the storm," Eden said unnecessarily. "Good man." Agnes said simply, "Come in, both of you. Hot soup's waiting." "I should get back," Callum said. "Nonsense. You'll catch your death driving back in this weather." Agnes's tone brooked no argument. Besides, I want to hear about this barn roof that needs fixing. And somehow, before Eden quite knew how it happened, Callum was in their kitchen eating soup while Agnes peppered him with questions about the ranch. Eden sat quietly, hyper-aware of every movement he made, every glance in her direction. When he finally left, after the soup and more coffee and Agnes's pointed suggestions about trading candles for roof repairs, Eden walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the shelter, for everything," she didn't say. "If you need anything," he said. "If Agnes needs anything, you send word. Promise me." Eden nodded, not trusting her voice. He touched his hat, started to turn, then stopped. "That kiss," he said, quiet enough that Agnes couldn't hear. "I'll be remembering that kiss through every storm that comes." Then he was gone, leaving Eden standing in the doorway with her hand pressed to her lips, wondering what she'd done, what she'd started, what price they'd both pay when the town found out. Because they would find out. They always did. But for now, for tonight, Eden let herself remember too the warmth of his house, the safety of his presence, the way the thunder hadn't mattered at all when his lips touched her hand. Maybe storms weren't always about destruction. Maybe sometimes they cleared the air for something new to grow. Rumors spread faster than thunder. By the next morning, Pine Hollow knew. How the story traveled so fast remained a mystery Eden would never solve. But by the time she ventured to town 3 days later, the whispers had evolved into a roar. "Mrs. Fletcher held court outside Morrison's general store, her voice carrying clear across the street. Spent the night there, bold as brass. The Turner boy saw his wagon at her place past decent hours." Eden kept walking, her back straight, basket steady on her arm. She'd expected this, had braced for it, but the reality still stung like winter wind. Inside Holbrook's, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Jacob served her with his usual efficiency, but his jaw was tight, his movements sharp. Even he, the most neutral of the merchants, seemed affected by the town's moral outrage. 3 pounds of flour," Eden said quietly, "and coffee, if you have it." "We need to talk about your account, Miss Harden." Jacob's voice was carefully professional. "There's been concern about the quality of your candles." Eden's hand stilled on her basket. Her candles were perfect, they both knew it. This was something else entirely. "What concerns?" She kept her voice level. "Some customers worry about influences on goods from your household." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I may need to reduce my orders." The blow landed exactly where intended. Without Holbrook's steady orders, Eden would have to travel to other towns to sell, assuming they'd take her goods at all. "I understand," she said, "because what else was there to say? I'll take today's purchases in cash then." The transaction completed in painful silence. Eden left with her supplies and the knowledge that her already small world had just gotten smaller. At the Reed Ranch, Callum was dealing with his own version of the town's displeasure. Reverend Norton had arrived just after sunrise, his black coat and serious expression making him look like a crow perched on the porch. Mr. Reed," the Reverend began without preamble. "I've come to discuss your immortal soul." Callum continued mending the harness he'd been working on. "That's kind of you, Reverend, but my soul and I are on good terms." "Are you?" The Reverend's voice took on the thunderous quality he employed during particularly fierce sermons. "A young woman of questionable reputation was seen leaving your property at an unseemly hour. The entire town is talking." "Then the entire town needs better hobbies." Callum tested the repaired leather, satisfied with its strength. "Miss Harden sought shelter from a storm. I provided it. That's what neighbors do." "That woman is no neighbor of decent folk." The Reverend's face flushed red. "She bears the mark of darkness, brings misfortune wherever she—" "Stop!" Callum stood slowly, and something in his expression made the Reverend step back. You're speaking about a lady in my presence. Choose your next words carefully. You defend her. The Reverend seemed genuinely shocked. You'd risk your standing in this community for a woman who works hard, cares for her grandmother, makes candles that light half the homes in this town? Callum's voice remained dangerously quiet. Tell me, Reverend, what exactly are her crimes? You know what she is, what her family. I know her father died when she was 3. I know her mother left. I know she's lived her entire life being blamed for things beyond her control. Callum picked up the harness again. A clear dismissal. Seems to me that's suffering enough without the church adding to it. The Reverend left in a huff, but he wasn't the last visitor. Throughout the morning, concerned citizens found reasons to drop by the Reed Ranch. The mayor's wife came to discuss the Christmas bazaar. 2 members of the town council needed to talk about road maintenance. Each visit carried the same underlying message: distance yourself from Eden Harden or face the consequences. By noon, Callum had had enough. He saddled his horse and rode to the Harden cabin, not caring who saw him. Eden was in the garden, pulling the last of the winter vegetables. She looked up at his approach, and he saw she already knew about the town's reaction. You shouldn't be here, she said before he could speak. That's what everyone keeps telling me. He dismounted, ground-tying his horse. Jacob canceled your candle orders. It wasn't a question, but Eden nodded anyway. Among other things, Mrs. Patterson crossed the street rather than pass me. The Fletcher children threw stones. She touched a small cut on her cheek. Their aim is improving. Rage, hot and sudden, flooded through Callum. They threw stones at you. Children mirror what they see. Eden returned to her harvesting, movements deliberately calm. Their parents throw words. The children simply found a more direct method. This is my fault. No. She straightened, fixing him with those dark eyes that saw too much. This is Pine Hollow being what it's always been. You just gave them fresh ammunition. Agnes appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but purposefully. Mr. Reed, good of you to come. She studied his face, then Eden's carefully neutral expression. I suppose the whole town's in an uproar. Something like that, Callum admitted. Good. Agnes's smile was sharp as winter wind. Nothing like shaking up a nest of hypocrites to see what falls out. Come inside, both of you. We need to talk. In the warm kitchen, Agnes served coffee and spoke with the authority of someone who'd lived through worse scandals than this. They want you to stay away, she said to Callum, to leave Eden to their tender mercies and pretend nothing happened. Nothing did happen, Eden said quietly, just shelter from a storm. Agnes snorted. Girl, I may be old, but I'm not blind. Something happened in that storm, and it's got nothing to do with rain. Eden's cheeks flushed, but she held her grandmother's gaze. It doesn't matter what happened. The town won't accept it. They'll make his life miserable, ruin his ranch, drive him out just like... She stopped, but they all heard the unspoken words. Just like my mother. I'm not going anywhere, Callum said firmly. You say that now. I say it because it's true. He caught Eden's hand across the table, felt her try to pull away, held firm. I've been shot at, survived blizzards that killed half our regiment, watched good men die for bad reasons. You think a few gossiping townsfolk scare me? This is different. Eden insisted. This is your home, your future. The ranch needs this town's support to survive. Then I'll find another town, or another way. His thumb traced circles on her palm, and he felt her trembling. But I won't pretend that kiss didn't happen. I won't act like you're something to be ashamed of. The boy's got spine, Agnes observed. Question is, do you... Eden looked at her grandmother in shock. What? You heard me, all your life. You've let this town tell you who you are. Maybe it's time you told them instead. Agnes leaned forward, her ancient eyes bright. Your mother ran because she was weak. But you're not your mother. Eden Grace. You're a hardened woman, and hardened women don't bow to fear. It's not about fear, isn't it? Agnes challenged. You're afraid if you reach for happiness, they'll find a way to take it. So you don't reach. You hide up here, making candles, accepting scraps of kindness like they're feast days. She covered Eden's free hand with her gnarled one. Child, I won't be here forever. Don't let me die watching you live half a life. Eden's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. What would you have me do? Fight, Agnes said simply. Love, live, be the woman you are, not the monster they painted you as. We don't have to give them more ammunition, Callum added quietly. But we don't have to hide either. I'll court you proper, in daylight, where everyone can see. Let them talk. Eventually they'll get tired of it. You don't know this town, Eden whispered. No, he agreed. But I know you, and I know what I want. A knock at the door interrupted whatever Eden might have said. She answered it to find young Thomas Bader, the baker's oldest boy, hat in hand and eyes downcast. Miss Hardin Pa sent me. Said to tell you he'll still take your candles, same as always. Said to tell you. The boy scrunched up his face, remembering the exact words. Said real light don't fear the darkness, and he's adding extra bread to your next order, for your grandmother. The boy ran off before Eden could respond, leaving her standing in the doorway with tears now flowing freely. See, Agnes said smugly, not everyone in this town is a fool. There's others who remember kindness, who value good work over gossip. You just have to give them a chance to show it. Callum stood, moving to where Eden stood silhouetted in the doorway. I should go, but I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until this town realizes I'm not going anywhere. Eden turned to face him, tears still wet on her cheeks. They'll make you regret it. Maybe. He cupped her face gently, thumbs wiping away tears. But not as much as I'd regret walking away from you. He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent, then stepped back. Tomorrow, Miss Hardin, in broad daylight, where everyone can see. After he left, Eden stood in the doorway a long time, watching his figure disappear down the road. Agnes came to stand beside her, both women silent in the gathering dusk. It won't be easy, Eden finally said. Nothing worth having ever is, Agnes replied. But that boy's got steel in him, and you've got more than you know. Together, she smiled. Together you might just teach this town a thing or two about what really matters. That night, Eden lay awake thinking about courage and choice, about reaching for happiness even when the cost seemed too high. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching. But for the first time in her life, Eden wasn't afraid of what the storm might bring. Memories unearthed. The afternoon sun slanted through the pines, casting long shadows across the porch where Eden and Callum sat. 3 weeks had passed since he'd declared his intentions to court her openly, and true to his word, he'd come calling every few days, weathering stares and whispers with stubborn grace. Today felt different, though calmer. Agnes dozed in her chair. The November air mild enough that they'd brought her outside, wrapped in quilts. The steady rhythm of her breathing provided a peaceful backdrop to the silence that had fallen between the younger pair. I need to tell you something, Eden said suddenly, her hands stilling on the candle she'd been carving. About my father, about what really happened. Callum set down the harness he'd been mending. He always brought work, making his visits seem practical as well as social. You don't owe me explanations, Eden. No, she agreed. But I want you to know. The town tells one story, but the truth. She took a breath, gathering courage like armor. The truth is worse and better all at once. She stood, pacing to the porch rail, needing distance to speak words she'd never said aloud. I told you my father died when I was 3. Lightning, the tree, all of that was true, but there's more. Callum waited, patient as stone. The week before he died, someone burned the Hendricks barn. 3 horses died, trapped inside. It was terrible, I remember the smoke, the way it hung over the valley for days. Eden gripped the porch rail. Someone said they'd seen my father near the barn that night. Just gossip, just speculation, but in a town like this. They blamed him. Without proof, without trial, just whispers that became truth in the telling. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white. He denied it, of course, but once suspicion takes root, it grows like a weed. People stopped buying from his store, stopped speaking to him on the street. My mother begged him to leave, to start fresh somewhere else. But he wouldn't. He was stubborn, said he'd done nothing wrong and wouldn't run like a guilty man. Eden laughed, brittle as autumn leaves. The night he died, there was a terrible fight. I remember hiding under my bed, listening to my parents shouting, my mother screaming that his pride would kill us all. My father. She paused, the memory sharp, even after 17 years. My father said he'd rather die innocent than live as a coward. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of prophecy fulfilled. The next morning, the storm came. He went to fix the fence, always something to fix on a farm. I followed him. Mama was still angry. Didn't notice I'd slipped out. Eden's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I saw it happen. The lightning, the tree. But before that, I saw him standing there in the rain, arms spread wide like he was daring God to strike him down. She turned to face Callum then, tears streaming. I've never known if it was coincidence or if somehow he called that lightning to himself, if he chose it rather than live with suspicion eating him hollow. Callum rose, crossing to her in 2 strides, but didn't touch her yet. Eden. After he died, they found evidence. The real barn burner, caught trying to sell one of the stolen saddles 2 towns over. The Hendricks apologized. The town felt guilty for a month or 2. But by then I was the girl whose father died by lightning, and my mother was half mad with grief, and the pattern was set. Eden wiped at her tears angrily. They needed someone to blame for their guilt, and we were convenient. Stormcurst was easier than admitting they'd driven an innocent man to despair. That's why your mother left? She lasted 3 years. 3 years of being the widow of the man they'd wronged. 3 years of watching people cross themselves when I walked by. Eden's shoulders sagged. I don't blame her anymore. She was weak, but she was also broken. The town broke her just as surely as that tree broke my father. Callum pulled her into his arms then, and Eden let herself be held, let herself take comfort in his solid warmth. It wasn't your fault, he murmured into her hair. None of it was your fault. I know that most days. She pulled back enough to see his face. But I needed you to know the truth. The whole truth, before... Before what? Before you decide if I'm worth the fight that's coming. Callum's hands cupped her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. You think this changes anything? You think knowing your father was a good man wronged makes me less likely to stand by you? I think the pattern's set to repeat. The town turning on someone, driving them to... No. The word was firm. Final. I'm not your father. Eden, I've got no pride to protect, no reputation to maintain. I've been a hired hand and a soldier and a dozen things in between. I've been nobody special so many places that being nobody special here doesn't frighten me. But the ranch is just land and wood. I can ranch anywhere, but I can't find another you anywhere. He rested his forehead against hers. Your father stood alone. You won't, that's the difference. From her chair, Agnes stirred. Boy's got sense, she said, apparently having been awake for some time. Your father was a good man, Eden, but he was proud. Pride and stubbornness look similar, but they're different beasts. One stands alone to prove a point. The other stands firm because it's right. Eden helped her grandmother sit up straighter, hands gentle despite their trembling. Grandmother, why didn't you ever tell me about the truth being found? What good would it have done? The town had made up its mind about us. Knowing your father was innocent after the fact just made them more determined to paint us as cursed, as if guilt could be transferred to the victim's family. Agnes caught Eden's hand. I let you think it was simple bad luck because that seemed kinder than knowing it was human cruelty. All these years, Eden murmured. All these years of carrying the weight of their guilt. But you don't have to carry it anymore, Callum said quietly. Not alone. A sound from the road drew their attention. A wagon approached, moving slowly, deliberately. As it grew closer, Eden recognized Thomas Bader driving, his eldest daughter beside him. The wagon bed held what looked like half his bakery's daily output. Mr. Bader. Eden moved to the porch steps. Is something wrong? The German baker climbed down, his weathered face serious. Ja, something is wrong. This town, it is wrong. But today, we begin to make right. He helped his daughter down, then began unloading packages. Fresh bread, apple strudel, cookies for your grandmother. And this, he produced a document, is contract for your candles, exclusive for my shop. I sell no others. Eden stared at the paper. Mr. Bader, I can't, the town will. Let them talk, my Anna. She reads by your candles every night. They burn clean, bright, like the person who makes them. His daughter nodded shyly, clutching a wrapped package. This is for you, Miss Harden, Anna said, offering the package. Mama's needlework. She wanted you to have it before she passed. She said you were kind when others weren't. Eden unwrapped the package with shaking hands. Inside was a beautifully embroidered tablecloth, worked with delicate flowers and vines. She remembered Mrs. Bader, worn thin by childbirth and hard work, but always ready with a smile. They'd rarely spoken, but Eden had once helped her carry packages when she was heavily pregnant with her youngest. She remembered that, Eden whispered. She remembered kindness. Mr. Bader said firmly, as do I, as do others, if given chance. More sounds from the road. Another wagon, this one driven by Dr. Patterson. Eden braced herself. Surely this would be more censure, more rejection. But the doctor climbed down with purpose, medical bag in hand. Mrs. Harden, he called to Agnes. I hear you've been poorly. Thought I'd check on you, seeing as I was passing by. Passing by, Agnes's voice was dry. Your house is clear on the other side of town. Man can take the long way sometimes. The doctor climbed the porch steps, especially when he spent 20 years being a coward. He met Eden's shocked gaze. Your father was my friend once. I should have stood by him. I didn't. Can't fix that now. But maybe I can do better by his daughter. Over the next hour, more people arrived. Not many. Pine Hollow wasn't suddenly transformed, but enough. The minister's wife brought preserves, mumbling about Christian charity. Old Mr. Garrett from the post office delivered a package that had apparently been mislaid for weeks, fabric Eden had ordered from a catalog. Even Jacob Holbrook appeared near sunset, hat literally in hand. About those candles, he said without preamble. Seems I was hasty. Business decision, you understand. But my customers have been complaining your candles burn longer, cleaner. If you're willing, I'd like to restore our arrangement. Eden looked at the small crowd gathered in her yard, still far outnumbered by those who whispered and shunned. But here, nonetheless. Why now? She asked. What's changed? It was Dr. Patterson who answered. Courage is contagious, Miss Harden. For 20 years, this town's let fear and guilt fester like an untreated wound. Maybe it's time we let it heal. Or maybe, Agnes added with her sharp smile, they've realized that alienating the best candle maker in the county is bad business. That broke the tension, drawing reluctant chuckles. As the impromptu gathering continued, Eden found herself beside Callum on the porch steps. You did this, she said quietly. I didn't do anything except refuse to hide. He took her hand, there in front of everyone. Turns out that's all it took for others to remember their courage. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eden watched her neighbors, for that's what they were. She realized, had always been even when they'd forgotten it talking in her yard. Not everyone would come around. Mrs. Fletcher and her ilk would whisper until their dying breaths. But this was a beginning. Thank you, she whispered to Callum, for seeing who I really am when I'd almost forgotten myself. Thank you, he replied, for being worth the seeing. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching, but for the first time in her life, Eden heard it as promise rather than threat. Storms brought rain, and rain brought growth. And sometimes a little lightning was what it took to split old wood and let new life through. Her father had stood in the storm alone, daring it to strike. But Eden stood surrounded by the man who loved her, the grandmother who'd raised her, and the beginning of a community that might, just might, learn to see her as she truly was. The storm could come. She was ready for it now, the festival in the rain. The Harvest Festival had been a Pine Hollow tradition for 40 years, but Eden hadn't attended since she was 12. That was the year Mary Fletcher had loudly proclaimed that Eden's presence would curse the crops, and the committee had politely suggested she might be more comfortable staying home. Now, standing in her bedroom, Eden held up the dress she'd spent 3 weeks altering her mother's Sunday best, found tucked in a trunk with lavender sachets and old dreams. The deep green fabric had held up well, needing only new buttons and a modern touch to the sleeves. You're going to wear a hole in that mirror, Agnes called from the doorway. Either put the dress on or don't, but stop fretting. I shouldn't go. Eden set the dress on her bed. It's asking for trouble. Everything worth doing asks for trouble. Agnes moved into the room with careful steps. Besides, that boy of yours already bought the tickets. You planning to make him waste his money? Callum had indeed purchased festival tickets, presenting them 2 weeks ago with studied casualness. Thought we might dance, he'd said, as if inviting Pine Hollow's most notorious woman to its most public event was perfectly ordinary. They don't want me there, grandmother. Some don't, Agnes agreed. Others do, and the rest are waiting to see which way the wind blows. You stay hidden, you let fear win. She picked up the dress, holding it out to Eden. Your mother wore this the night your father proposed. She told me once it was the bravest thing she ever did, saying yes to him in front of the whole town. And look how that ended. Agnes's expression softened. 20 years of happiness before 3 years of sorrow. Most folks don't get that much joy in a lifetime. She pressed the dress into Eden's hands. Don't let fear rob you of whatever time you're given. An hour later, Eden stood ready, hair pinned up in a style she'd practiced but never worn in public, her mother's dress fitting as if tailored for her. When Callum arrived, his eyes widened in a way that made her blush. You look... He seemed to run out of words, settling for taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. Every man in Pine Hollow is going to envy me tonight. Every man in Pine Hollow is going to think you've lost your mind, Eden corrected, but she let him help her into the wagon. The festival grounds were lit with lanterns that swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the crowd. The smell of roasted corn and apple cider filled the air, mixing with the sounds of fiddle music and laughter. It was achingly familiar and utterly foreign all at once. Eden felt the change in atmosphere the moment they arrived. Conversations stuttered and stopped. Heads turned, and a path seemed to clear before them, not in welcome but in wary avoidance. Steady, Callum murmured, his hand firm at her elbow. Eyes up, shoulders back. We belong here as much as anyone. They made their way to the dance floor, where couples were already moving to a lively reel. Eden saw Mrs. Fletcher near the refreshment table, her face pinched with disapproval. The woman immediately turned to her companions. no doubt sharing her outrage at Eden's audacity. But there were other faces, too. Thomas Bader raised his cup in greeting. "Doctor." Patterson nodded from across the square. Small gestures, but Eden treasured each one. "May I have this dance, Miss Harden?" Callum asked formally, loud enough to carry. Eden's heart hammered against her ribs. Once they stepped onto that dance floor, there would be no going back. Everyone would see. Everyone would judge. Thunder rumbled overhead, though the sky had been clear moments before. Of course, even the weather seemed determined to mark this moment. "You may, Mr. Reed," she said, taking his offered hand. They joined the other couples as a new song began, a waltz that Eden knew from watching through windows all those years ago. Callum led with surprising grace, and she found herself relaxing into the familiar steps. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he spun her past a cluster of shocked onlookers. "Army has these things called social evenings, meant to civilize us rough sorts." His eyes never left hers. Never saw the point until now. The sky opened then, sudden as a bucket overturned. Cold rain drenched the festival grounds, sending people shrieking for cover. The musicians scrambled to protect their instruments, and the dance floor cleared in seconds, except for Eden and Callum. "We should," Eden began. "Should we?" Callum pulled her closer, rain streaming down his face. "I promised you a dance. Don't see how a little water changes that." So they danced, in the pouring rain, to music that existed only in memory. They waltzed across the empty floor. Eden's careful hair arrangement collapsed, sending wet strands across her face. Her mother's dress clung to her frame. Callum's best shirt turned transparent with water. And they danced. Lightning flashed overhead, thunder following close behind. Eden waited for the fear, the memories of another storm, another loss. But all she felt was Callum's hand in hers, his arm strong around her waist, the absurd joy of dancing in a downpour while the whole town watched from shelter. "You're laughing," Callum said wonderingly. She was, Eden realized, laughing at the madness of it, at the shocked faces peering from doorways, at how the thing she dreaded had become something altogether different. "They already think I bring storms," she said, having to raise her voice over the rain. "Might as well give them a show." He spun her again, and when she came back to him, he was laughing too. "That's my girl." Someone started slow clapping from the covered pavilion. Eden turned to see Thomas Bader, still applauding despite his wife tugging at his arm. "Doctor," Patterson joined in. Then his daughter, one by one. A handful of others added their approval, not many, but enough. "Fools, misses." Fletcher's voice cut through the rain. "Dancing in a thunderstorm like heathens, she'll bring lightning down on us all." As if in response, thunder crashed directly overhead, the sound enormous enough to shake the ground. But Callum just pulled Eden closer. "Let it come," he said against her ear. "I'm not afraid." "Callum?" But he was already moving, and before Eden quite knew what was happening, he dipped her low. Theatrical as any stage performer, the watching crowd gasped. Time seemed to slow, the rain falling in silver curtains around them. And then he kissed her. Not the quick, desperate kiss of their first storm, but something deliberate and declaring. A kiss that said, "This is my choice. This is my person. This is my stand." When they broke apart, Eden couldn't tell if the wetness on her face was rain or tears. The thunder rolled away, the rain gentling to a drizzle, and still they stood there, holding each other in the middle of the empty dance floor. "Inside, both of you, before you catch your deaths." "Doctor," Patterson called, breaking the spell. "I'm not treating pneumonia because you two decided to be romantic idiots." They ran for shelter then, hand in hand, Eden's ruined dress dragging in puddles. In the covered pavilion, someone handed them towels. Someone else, Mrs. Patterson. Wonder of wonders pressed cups of hot cider into their hands. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, she said, but her tone was more amazed than condemning. Sometimes they're the same thing, Callum replied, his arm still around Eden despite their bedraggled state. The festival tried to resume once the rain passed, but the mood had shifted. Eden felt the stares, heard the whispers, but they felt different now. Some still carried condemnation, but others held something like admiration, or at least curiosity. She laughed. She heard someone whisper, "In the middle of the storm, she laughed," as if that simple human reaction was more shocking than any curse could be. When the evening finally wound down, Callum drove Eden home through streets that sparkled with puddles. They didn't speak much. What was there to say after such a public declaration? Agnes was waiting on the porch, wrapped in shawls and smiling like a cat with cream. "Heard you two put on quite a show." "News travels fast," Eden said, wringing water from her skirts. "Faster than lightning. In this town." Agnes studied them both, taking in their soaked clothes and intertwined hands. Good. About time someone reminded these folks that joy can exist right alongside their fear. After Callum left, Eden sat with her grandmother, both of them looking out at the storm-washed night. "I'm proud of you," Agnes said quietly. "Your mother would be too. You did what she couldn't. In the end, you chose love over fear." "They'll make us pay for it," Eden said. "Tonight was just the beginning." "Maybe. But did you see their faces when you laughed for just a moment? Some of them remembered you're just a woman, not a curse. That's worth whatever comes next." Eden thought about the dance, the rain, the kiss that declared everything, the way Callum had held her like she was precious, not dangerous, the slow clapping that suggested not everyone in Pine Hollow was lost to prejudice. "He wasn't afraid," she murmured, "even with the lightning right overhead. He wasn't afraid." "No," Agnes agreed. "That boy knows the difference between what's truly dangerous and what's just noise and light. Question is, do you—" Eden considered that as the last rumbles of thunder faded into distance. All her life, she'd lived small, quiet, careful not to draw the storm. But tonight she'd danced in the rain, laughed in the face of lightning, kissed a man while the whole town watched. And the world hadn't ended. "I'm learning," she said finally. "With him, I'm learning." Agnes patted her hand. "That's all any of us can do, child. Learn to dance in the rain instead of always hiding from it." As Eden prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her hair was a wild mess, her mother's dress probably ruined, her lips still swollen from kissing. She looked nothing like the careful, controlled woman who'd started the evening. She looked alive. For the first time in 20 years, Eden Harden looked fully, gloriously alive. And storm or no storm, she intended to stay that way. Thunder in the sky, but peace in the heart. A week after the festival, Pine Hollow witnessed something it had never seen before. Eden Harden fixing the old fence around the cemetery in broad daylight, with Callum Reed working beside her, while a small but growing group of townspeople watched without hostility. The change hadn't happened overnight. There'd been resistance. Of course, Mrs. Fletcher had organized a petition demanding the town council address the moral degradation of public displays. But the petition had gathered fewer signatures than expected, and Judge Hartwell had dismissed it with characteristic dryness. Last I checked, dancing in the rain wasn't illegal. Sarah, foolish, perhaps, but not illegal. More importantly, the younger generation had begun to shift. Children who'd thrown stones now peeked around their mother's skirts with curiosity rather than fear. When Eden smiled at them, some even smiled back. "Pass me that hammer," Eden said to Callum, who was already holding it out. They'd developed an easy rhythm over the past weeks, working together on various projects around both properties. Planning to build something, Thomas Bader approached, his eldest son in tow. "The old schoolhouse," Eden replied, gesturing to the abandoned building across from the cemetery. Agnes mentioned it's been empty for 3 years. Thought maybe it could be useful again. As what? This from Dr. Patterson, who'd taken to happening by whenever Eden was in town. Eden glanced at Callum, who nodded encouragingly. A lending library. Maybe a place for children to come after school, learn useful things, sums and reading, but also practical skills, candle making, basic doctoring, how to tend animals. The doctor stroked his beard thoughtfully. Who would teach these things? Anyone with knowledge to share. Eden said simply, You could teach basic medicine, mister. Bader might share baking skills. Callum knows horses better than anyone. She hesitated, then added, I could teach arithmetic, and maybe show them that understanding the natural world, including storms, makes them less frightening. Turn fear into knowledge, the doctor mused. It's not a bad notion. By afternoon, what had started as fence repair had become an impromptu town meeting. Not everyone was supportive Mrs. Fletcher stood at the edge of the gathering, radiating disapproval, but enough people were interested to make it feel possible. The building needs work, Judge Hartwell observed, having arrived to see what the fuss was about. Roof repairs, new windows, heating stove. I can help with carpentry, Callum offered. Know a bit about construction from the Army. Windows can wait until spring, Thomas Bader added. But I could donate an old stove from the bakery. One by one, people began offering what they could: lumber, labor, books from their own collections. Eden watched in amazement as her simple idea took shape through community effort. That evening, she and Callum sat on her porch, watching storm clouds build over the mountains. Agnes dozed in her chair, tired but pleased with the day's developments. They're actually going to help, Eden said, still hardly believing it. Some of them. Callum took her hand, threading their fingers together. Others will come around when they see the world doesn't end because you're teaching children arithmetic. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Eden tensed automatically, then consciously relaxed. Agnes is getting worse, she said quietly, changing the subject to a worry that had been growing daily. Her breathing, the way she tires so easily. I know. Callum squeezed her hand. But she saw today. Saw you taking your place in this town. That matters to her. She won't see the library finished. Maybe not, but she'll see it started. See you building something instead of just surviving. He turned to face her fully. Eden, I need to ask you something. The serious tone made her stomach flutter. What is it? The ranch is doing better. Not thriving yet, but better. And with both of us working together, pooling resources. He took a breath. What I'm trying to say is, I want to court you proper, with the intention of marriage, but I need to know if that's something you want too. Eden's heart raced. Callum, we've barely been... I know, and I'm not saying tomorrow or next month, but I'm building that ranch for a future, and I can't imagine any future that doesn't have you in it. He cupped her face gently. I just need to know I'm not alone in that imagining. Before Eden could answer, Agnes spoke from her chair. Say yes, you foolish girl. Grandmother. What, you think I'm going to pretend I wasn't listening? Agnes opened her eyes, fixing Eden with a stare that still held all its old sharpness. That boy's offering you a life, not just a refuge. Don't be too proud to take it. Eden looked between her grandmother and Callum, then out at the approaching storm. All her life, she'd been the girl who brought tempests. But somewhere between that first meeting in the fog and dancing in the rain, she'd discovered that storms could bring people together as surely as they drove them apart. Yes, she said simply. Court me, Callum Reed, but know that I come with complications. I'm counting on it, he said, and kissed her as the first drops of rain began to fall. Over the following weeks, Pine Hollow adjusted to its new reality with surprising grace. The schoolhouse project brought people together who hadn't spoken in years. Eden's candles became not just accepted but sought after, with orders coming from neighboring towns. Callum's ranch began to prosper as other ranchers. Seeing his success, started asking his advice. There were still those who whispered, who crossed streets to avoid Eden, who predicted doom. But their voices grew quieter as autumn turned to winter and no great catastrophe befell the town. One evening in early December, Eden stood in the renovated schoolhouse, watching a dozen children practice their letters on slate boards. The room smelled of new wood and chalk dust, of hope and possibility. Tomorrow would be the official opening, with lessons and demonstrations and whatever community they could build. Your father would be proud. Doctor, Patterson said, appearing beside her. He always believed in education, in lifting people up rather than keeping them down. You knew him well. We played chess every Wednesday for 10 years. He beat me more often than not. The doctor smiled sadly. I failed him when it mattered. Failed you and your mother too, but maybe making things right for the next generation counts for something. Before Eden could respond, Callum appeared in the doorway. Eden, you need to come home. It's Agnes. The ride back was a blur. Eden found her grandmother in bed, breathing shallow but steady, her eyes still alert. Doctor Patterson followed close behind, but after a brief examination, he simply pressed Eden's hand and withdrew. My strong girl, Agnes whispered when they were alone. Look at you, teaching school, planning a future, choosing love over fear. I can go easy now, knowing you'll be all right. Don't talk like that, Eden begged, though she could see the truth in her grandmother's peaceful expression. Hush now. I've had a good run. Raised a granddaughter I'm proud of. Saw her find a good man. Watched this town start to remember its better nature. Agnes patted Eden's hand weakly. What more could I ask for? She lasted 3 more days, long enough to see the schoolhouse open, to hear through the window the sound of children laughing as they learned. She passed quietly during a gentle snowfall, with Eden and Callum beside her. The funeral drew more people than Eden had expected. Not just those who'd come around recently, but others who remembered Agnes's quiet kindnesses over the years, who respected a woman who'd raised her granddaughter against all odds. Standing at the graveside, Eden felt Callum's strong presence beside her. The cemetery was peaceful under its blanket of snow, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. No storms today, just quiet acceptance and the promise of spring hidden beneath winter's cover. She was right, Eden said as they walked home, about choosing love over fear, about building instead of just surviving. She was right about a lot of things, Callum agreed, his arm secure around her waist. That night, Eden stood on the porch where she'd spent so many evenings with Agnes. The air was crisp and clear, stars brilliant in the winter sky. Thunder rumbled somewhere far away. There was always a storm somewhere, but here, now, there was peace. Not every storm means destruction, she said to the night. Sometimes they clear the air for new growth. Sometimes they bring people together. And sometimes, she smiled, thinking of a kiss in the rain, of children learning their letters, of a future being built one day at a time. Sometimes they're just noise and light, signifying nothing but the world turning as it always has. Callum joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Come inside, it's cold. In a moment. She leaned into his warmth, looking out at the town that had shaped her, challenged her, and finally, slowly, begun to accept her. I was just thinking Agnes was born here, lived her whole life here, is buried here. My father, too, and my mother, wherever she is, was formed by this place. And you? Callum asked. What about you? Eden considered the question. I was born in a storm, raised in whispers, taught to hide from lightning. But I'm still here, still standing. And now, she gestured toward town, where lights glowed warm in windows, where tomorrow children would come to learn, where someday she and Callum would raise children of their own. Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living. That's my girl, Callum said, echoing words from a rain-soaked dance. As they went inside together, Eden paused for one last look at the sky. Somewhere, a storm was brewing. Storms always were, but here in Pine Hollow, in this moment, there was peace. The girl born with thunder had finally found her calm, and it was enough. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Eden and Callum's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories of love, courage, and redemption. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales alive for listeners everywhere.